Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Hello, I'm Jeff Kellam, and I'll be your host today for Encounter. And my guest is Roger Luther, who has written a book called Expressions of Faith. It explores the religious structures of Broome County. When I was in parish ministry, sometimes people would come up to me and they would say, Pastor, I can worship on the golf course on Sunday mornings as much as I can in church. Isn't that right? And I'd say, well, you can, but you don't. In reality, you can make any place a sacred space. And I suppose there are some theological things that were said on the golf course or on the 17th hole, maybe some desperate prayers. But most of the time, people have come together in spaces, in structures, in fact, for generations or even millennia, mosques and synagogues, temples, cathedrals, and these days, worship centers. There are some 300 of those structures in the Broome County area, and Roger Luther, our guest today, has chronicled those. I would say that you are the author of this book called Expressions of Faith. You're not a writer, and there are very few words in this book. It's mostly a picture book.
Absolutely.
A coffee table book.
Yeah.
And you are not, by way of introduction, you're not an architect. You're not a professional photographer. You were an electronics,
In electronics manufacturing.
Okay.
Throughout my career.
And you and I had a connection with Trumansburg that I thought was kind of interesting. My last church that I retired from about 7 years ago was First Presbyterian Church of Ulysses in Trumansburg. And about a block away, you started your career.
Trumansburg is near and dear to my heart. That's where Robert Moog invented the Moog synthesizer, an electronic musical instrument. And I traveled up from the deep south to take a job with Moog, actually the year that he moved to the Buffalo area from Trumansburg. I was fortunate enough to tour the Trumansburg facility in '71, then I started working with him in '72, and the rest is history. That developed into different electronics manufacturing. But yeah, I was there when Bob Moog was making history, and it was something I'll never forget.
Oh, I'll bet. You meet any famous Moog synthesizer players?
It's funny, yeah. It was a very unique experience. Yeah, you'd be working there, and it wouldn't be unusual for jazz great Chick Corea to walk through and walk up to your workstation and start talking to you. Isao Tomita, all sorts of names that aren't so familiar these days, but Keith Emerson, who were very popular at the time.
Sure.
It was incredible
experience. That was exciting.
Yeah.
And now in retirement, you're very interested in history. You're part of the Broome County Historical Society. Yeah. And also New York Landmarks.
Yeah, it's I've always had an interest in history and photography and historic preservation. Yeah. So even though I had the day job in electronics, I had the equivalent of, I think, 2 other full-time jobs with historic preservation and just history in general and photography. Now that I'm retired, it's just wonderful. Yeah. Now I can do the things that really count.
That's right. And you've been in this area about 15 years.
I have.
And so the book that you've put together called Expressions of Faith, and again the subtitle is Exploring the Religious Structures of Broome County. Looking at the table of contents, by the way, this is not a complimentary copy. I got this book for Christmas, and Roger only charged me $10 to autograph it. So.
What was that all?
Yeah. So we're going to take a look at some of the pieces, some of the sections of the book. I'm interested in how you came up with a table of contents. It begins with diversity, and then sanctuary. Then you've got artwork and icons, expressions in glass, which would be the stained glass windows. Mm-hmm. then the organs and the bells. And I know that we're going to work our way up into the steeples to see some of these bells.
Very good.
So let's start with diversity.
Well, you might even want to go a step back and talk about the title.
Yeah.
This is a project. I might talk a little bit about how this developed.
Yes.
It's a project by the Broome County Historical Society, and I had been doing a lot of architectural photography since I started moving here, and at one point about 6 years ago I was approached by the Broome County Historical Society. They said that they were interested in starting a project to document every religious structure in the county. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of change. You know, churches, congregations are merging, churches are closing, others are being built, some are being demolished. So with all this activity, they thought it would be a good idea, and it's something that had never been done before, to just document every religious structure as it is today. They asked if I would be interested in doing the photography, which is the main part of the project, and heck, jumped at the opportunity.
Yes.
This is the chance of a lifetime. So that's how it all started about 6 years ago. The idea right from the start was to try to capture the diversity and the beauty of these structures. It is not a religious project. It's not even a history project. It's an attempt to capture the beauty and the diversity.
Yeah.
And diversity is what it's all about. So when it came time to do a publication, at that point I'd been through over 200 religious structures and shot in excess of 10,000 photographs. We decided, well, it's about time we did a publication. Well, what should it be like? And we talked it over amongst the other board members and decided that this first publication should be a coffee table style book, really to highlight the beauty of these structures. And since it's all about diversity, that is the main section of the book. Thought about calling it Religious Structures of Broome County, but that just doesn't have the ring.
Right. It's not as warm.
And since it's all about diversity, they come in all sizes, they're all shapes, they're all different architectural styles, they're all ideologies, and several different languages. There's one thing that they all have in common, and that is they are expressions of faith.
Yeah.
Every one is an expression of faith. So that's how I came up with the title. And then on to the answer your question, the sections. Diversity is obviously the main section, and that just shows the different styles. It shows contrast between, I think there's on one page, there's a sanctuary that holds 16 people. On the facing page, there's one that holds 1,700. Yeah. So there's all these contrasts in that section. And the photos in that section there's typically an exterior shot and then a few interior shots. The other sections are the sanctuary section. I was struck with just when you walk in each of these buildings, doesn't matter what type they are, how big they are, you get the same feeling when you walk in the door. I'm fortunate to be by myself usually. It's dark, it's silent.
Right.
And you get the same feeling. It's a very profound feeling when you walk in these buildings, and you can't help but feel a great respect for not just the people that built these buildings, but the people that worship in them. So I thought it would be appropriate to have a category of just sanctuaries and show some examples of these rooms. The next section is artwork and icons.
Yeah.
There's amazing artwork in some of these structures. And so that section features those. Expressions in glass, that's the stained glass windows, and not only the stained glass windows, but some interesting neon signs. Organs, we have some beautiful organs in this area, and then finally the bells. Right from the start, I took a great interest in shooting not just what people see when they walk in these churches and religious structures, but the hidden things, the things that are behind the scenes and above the ceiling and up the bell towers. So I had to include a section on the bells.
And in your exploration of these bell towers, you found you're probably the only person who went and looked inside the bell to see if anything was written there or outside the bells. And we'll get to that by the end of the program.
All right, sounds good.
Well, let's think about one particular. Let's begin with what I would say was the prototypical Episcopal church. When I look at that, was it Christ Episcopal Church in Binghamton?
Yeah.
Let's think about that church, the exterior, Gothic stone, but I would say even without the sign, I would say, yeah, my first guess, Episcopal Church.
That is a beautiful church. It's located right downtown. Everybody's familiar with it. It was designed by one of the greatest church architects in the country, Richard Upjohn. And he designed and had that building built. It was built by J. Stuart Wells, who also built the Inebriate Asylum, the Phelps Mansion, several other famous historic buildings in town. But yeah, Richard Upjohn designed the building. I think it was, 1853 or so. And at the time they built it, they ran out of money and couldn't afford to put the tower up.
Oh my.
So it sat there without a tower for years. And then about 50 years after that, John Stuart Wells was still around. He paid to have the tower built.
Yeah. And the interior is, you have the organ pipes on one side and this beautiful green ceiling and red apse area.
Yeah. Just gorgeous.
Yeah.
Again, at 1855, the colors, it takes your breath away when you walk in that facility. Now, it's interesting because a few weeks ago, I had an opportunity to attend a function at an Episcopal church in Elmira, and it was a carbon copy of what we have here. And it turns out it was Richard Upjohn, the same architect.
Yeah. Well, and then if we move on to the next, we have another image of that church. But we'll move on to something very simple now in terms of architecture, still stone. This is Beth David Synagogue. It too has a stone facade, but it built much more recently.
This synagogue is on Riverside Drive. Again, we drive past it all the time. And it's noted for its architecture. That's a good shot right there, but it's heavily influenced by, actually Frank Lloyd Wright to some extent. The architect was Werner Seligman. He was a Cornell professor and the dean of Syracuse University's architectural school. It was built in 1963, and it actually won a very prestigious citation for its architecture. But it's beautiful, a lot of wood, a lot of glass. There are, I think, 11 skylights above the worship area.
It's very bright.
Very bright. Yeah.
Lots of light flowing in. And again, very simple, but when you look at the interior, you see those religious symbols and the parts of the ritual that immediately draw your eye as you walk in. And I don't know that there's anything that compares with the Buddhist temple we're about to look at. Remind folks that these are temples and mosques and churches and synagogues and not simply the typical church that you'd find on the corner.
Yeah. In fact, I should probably point that out, that this project is every religious structure, not just churches.
Yeah.
Synagogues, mosques, halls, temples. And not just necessarily current religious structures. It could be something that started out as a church and later turned into a residence, or the other way around. It could be something that started out as a hardware store and is now a church. This is Wat Lao Buddhist Temple. When you're driving up I-81 and look off to the right around Castle Creek, you see that big archway. It leads to a